There is the debate on population, and then there is the meta-debate, which is the debate about why we have the sort of debate on population that we have or that we don't have. Meta-debates are very important in the academic world, and in this case, crucial. Why are we not allowed to talk about population? Why are we so few here today? Why is so little said about it? And why are such very odd things said about it? These were the themes of this book, Overloading Australia. Of course, it does cover the debate on population. It gives you the basic reasons why we should be concerned about population, both worldwide and in Australia. But mainly it's looking at the debate, it's refuting the distortions of the debate and suggesting a right way to look at it. And to do that, you inevitably have to analyse why is the debate being distorted, who is distorting it, and what is their vested interest that leads them to do so. There are a number of reasons, of course, why. Perhaps it's our own natural bias towards our own species chauvinism, if you like, that makes us think that more humans are good. There are also people who feel that there's a very important quality in our society called humanism. There was a time when the only humans who were truly human were your own tribe, and other humans were sort of obscene parodies who were probably best enslaved or killed. We've moved on from that, and from the days when every nation was a sort of semi-criminal conspiracy against the rest of the world. And most of us would agree that that's a rather good thing on balance. And so you get some people who are terrified that even to talk about humans being in plague proportions or too many could be the beginnings of an undercutting of humanism. Am I speaking loud enough? Yep, good. A lot of people are now starting to be concerned about the fact that there isn't a debate on population when there should be. Crispin Hull, the former editor of the Canberra Times, recently wrote in the Canberra Times, "Much government policy in the last 30 years has been made without regard to population, particularly immigration policy. On one hand, governments bleat about water shortages, salinity, soil depletion, housing shortages, housing affordability, climate change, public transport, university and preschool places, pollution, and so on. And on the other hand, they keep increasing immigration. The two things were not related, when the relationship should be obvious to anyone with Year 10 education and an IQ above 95, let alone to policymakers allegedly with PhDs and IQs of 140. So quite a fair bit of this book contains such things. The light is so dim I'm going to have to change glasses. Can we? Great. Thanks. For instance, we describe the kind of vested interests that we're up against, the population boosters, as we call them. A small smorgasbord of examples. In 2001, a growth-obsessed Lord Mayor of Brisbane, Jim Sorley, Labor, told the press that Australia needed to triple its population in 20 years. In 2001, the Minister for Financial Services, Joe Hockey, scion of a real estate family, told the media and the so-called Committee for Sydney that Sydney needed to shake off its and show it was a mature city by doubling its population ASAP. Victoria's recent Premier Steve Bracks unveiled plans to increase the state's population by 1 million before 2025. Meanwhile, South Australian Premier Mike Rann planned to increase immigration to South Australia to 50,000 a year and raise population 500,000 by 2050. And in October 2006, Harry Triguboff, one of Australia's biggest property developers, urged Sydney to increase its population to 20 million. 50, Australia to increase its population to 150 million. The reason? Cities must grow or die, he said. There were too many trees and not enough people. Such opinions receive well-organised backing. Catherine Betts and Michael Gilding put it, and they put it so well that we simply quote them. The public record shows that growth lobbyists organised a pyramid structure to promote pro-immigration views, that they founded the so-called Australian Population Institute, a name probably chosen to sound like the Demographers Professional Association, and that at least in New South Wales they gave large amounts of money to political parties. The interview data confirm that some of Australia's richest people are fervent supporters of immigration. The public record also shows that no matter how high federal politicians push the numbers, some lobbyists will press for more. All of this may mean that rather than having growth for growth's sake, Australia has growth for the growth lobby's sake. So that was the crucial point that our book had to make. As I put it in the introduction, in Australia, right-wing it is a problem both of the left and the right in politics. Right-wing growthists demand endless growth of the economy backed by endless growth of population. Forced since the late 2006 to accept a serious public debate about water supplies and about how to maintain growth without more greenhouse gases, they are nevertheless determined to scotch any discussion about limiting population. Determined means that, for instance, in the Murdoch press, you do not get a position as a senior writer unless you are a growth tout, or as they prefer to say, a senior editor. Many on the left also refuse to debate population matters. They confuse immigrants with refugees, and they make absurd claims that limiting immigration would tumble us into fascism. Various Lord Nelsons of the media do, of course, on occasion put the telescope to their blind eye and discern individual problems. Unaffordable housing, very concerned about that. Environmental destruction, how unfortunate. Urban crowding, out of control greenhouse emissions. But somehow they manage not to see any connection to population numbers. Yet when one turns to the email group run by Sustainable Population Australia, one sees these connections all the time. How can politicians and journalists and even ordinary acquaintances keep asserting such nonsense as that we have a falling population in Australia when one sees new suburbs going up everywhere? How did Peter Costello get away with raiding the public purse for baby bribes, claiming that births in Australia were not keeping up with deaths, when we have the Australian Bureau of Statistics, from whose website you can discover within 5 minutes that births in Australia are twice deaths and have been so for 20 years and will be so for at least a little while longer. That didn't stop ABC TV putting to air a program expressing enormous concern that births in Australia were not keeping up with deaths. Furthermore, in their rather dim-witted libertarian way, they were deeply concerned that Australian couples were not having as many children as they would have chosen, as they would have wished. It didn't apparently occur to the journalists that they were also not buying as many sports cars as they would have wished, or taking as many overseas holidays. So, this belief that Australia has no limits lies deep in our culture. And yet population growth lies behind most of our troubles. Congested cities, bizarre housing prices that turn couples into mortgage slaves who work absurd hours and neglect their children, who often turn to drugs. The endless ongoing destruction of environments and other species, water shortages, falling food security, greenhouse emissions. And yet government, as Ian Lowe remarked, relaunching this book recently, speaks with forked tongue. It manages to believe simultaneously that population is falling and to talk about our falling population and to argue that we need much greater greenhouse emission limits because of our rapidly rising population. I needn't give you examples of that. Let me move on rapidly. I talked recently to permaculture people in Sydney. As you can imagine, they have a very strong interest in seeing what you can do at individual level in growing more food and doing it within an urban context. But Permaculture North, the North Sydney Association, is of course aware that the whole intention of the planners of Sydney is to squeeze them out. Sydney is to fit in, an extra 1 million people in the next 11 years, if I remember, and every council has been given its allocation of additional buildings and additional high-rise. There is no future for permaculture in Sydney. And when I talked to them about this, a lot of people came up and said, yes, you know, we've seen this, we've been concerned about it, but if I mention it, I get jumped on. Jumped on meaning that they were called racists or fascists. It's quite bizarre, this feeling that you're being somehow anti-social, cultural, even criminal, to think of limiting the size of population. Of course, some people do believe you could only do it by compulsion. And in fact, you have to show them that our natural increase is in fact going to level off, provided you don't offer baby bonuses and so on. And that again, we could in fact double our number of refugees and still have zero net migration. So a lot of people just haven't worked out the figures on that.